and Mr Fitzgerald.
Grounded represents community-led housing, which in a way is the inverse of this proposed corporatisation of the rental market. And we are concerned that this legislation rolls out the welcome mat for rent maximisation strategies and takes market outcomes as an article of faith over and above the monopoly power that this legislation enhances. We also are concerned that prop tech allows build to rent to engage in surveillance pricing, but we see no oversight from government in terms of requirements for developers to provide the sort of data that would reflect public interest outcomes. For years, we've heard of 3% vacancy rates being in equilibrium. This is the perfect opportunity for this to occur, and government should be ensuring that competitive supply levels are maintained, that eviction rates are monitored, and rental prices as well are investigated, so that there is some public interest return for the millions and billions of dollars of discounts handed to this new industry.
Mr Fitzgerald, I was interested in your opening statement. So are you concerned that we are seeing a corporatisation of housing in Australia?
Absolutely. This is delivering horrifying results in the Northern Hemisphere, and this legislation makes no account of that. It perplexes me that this government, who purports to be in support of Labor, is allowing rent maximisation strategies to come through unabated. And yes, I agree, pushing mum and dad investors out of the housing market will result in less competition. And what we're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere is a horrific new software program called YieldStar, which in Atlanta coordinates rental increases for 81% of rental properties. And the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco has now banned this as a monopolistic practice. And there's just nothing in this legislation that even prepares us for what's coming.
Chair, and I've got some questions for Mr Fitzgerald, and they're along similar lines, Mr Fitzgerald, but you've mentioned some horrific circumstances as you described them in the Northern Hemisphere. I specifically wanted to ask you about things like prop tech, algorithmic rent setting, vacancy coordination, monetisation of data. What do those mean in terms of tenant experience, security for tenants, affordability for tenants, evictions, maintenance, discrimination? So what's the tenant experience in general terms from those things that you've alluded to?
Well, a tenant can receive a notification at any time of the day that their rent has just increased. And as numerous interviews with property managers have revealed, doing this removes the moral consideration of that interpersonal relationship and dehumanises the process, delivering much higher rents. And because we have such poor measurements of vacancy rates that only look at advertised vacancy, do not look at speculative vacancies held empty, this consolidation of market power, as we're seeing in San Francisco, Atlanta, other places, Spain as well, many properties are held vacant and only released to the market when tenants are desperate for property at higher rents. So that's the sort of future that this bill brings through without concern, and I really think it should be brought back to the table, and these sort of data privacy issues brought to the fore, because it is really the only way this model works is if this data can be agglomerated and then on-sold to marketers. And they're even measuring the weight of tenants' pets. They're getting down to such levels that are recorded on their databases so that they can maximise returns, whether it be dog walking services or whatnot. Everything comes with a price now. There's no community value to it. And we really have to be careful, because when rental-backed mortgage securities come through, the market's going to be throwing money at build to rent. And there's not going to be much room for mum and dad investors.
Are there any protections or mechanisms in the legislation as drafted, or in fact any other tenancy protections anywhere else to prevent that kind of predatory corporate landlord behaviour that you have that you've outlined if the BTR sector were to emerge as foreshadowed?
As a relatively recent industry, governments around the world are still reeling with these sort of potentials that algorithms allow. So there isn't much legislation out there, but for a day's coding, we could have build-to-rent operators providing this data to government. They're already collecting this data, so why shouldn't it be public interest as well? And, I implore the government to look seriously at this because, really the money that is enabled by this sort of data overreach is very, very concerning.
So just to be clear, are there any protections in the legislation as currently drafted for that kind of behaviour?
None at all.
Okay, thank you. Are there any protections in this legislation for retaining affordable rents that the legislation provides for? But are there any protections in the legislation for retaining affordable rents after the 15-year holding period, or for maintaining high-quality dwellings given the implied 15-year depreciation period?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about that short window and what happens between the 10 and 15-year mark. We've seen in New York a lot of private capital zeroing in on these sort of investment opportunities in that last 10 years to really turn these into penthouse developments. And so I think the 15 years should be expanded to 25, if not 40 years. If they're going to get 44% depreciation, that is, a serious subsidy, and we need a longer window. We can't have another NRAS outcome of 15 years coming through. And we know that build to rent will locate these dwellings, these apartments in inner city areas where the capital growth is higher, where at that 15-year mark, penthouse development will be extremely lucrative and we'll have lost supply again.
So just to be clear, there are no protections in place for retaining affordable rents after the 15-year period? Is that right?
No, there's no incentive.
Okay, thank you. And again, Chair, last bracket of questions here.
One final question, Senator McKim.
Sure, thank you. So, Mr. Fitzgerald, I want to ask about what the gaps or the weaknesses are in this legislation's requirement for the provision of 10% affordable tenancies. And can I just ask you, in framing your answer, to consider the limited number, whether or not they are for genuinely low-income people, whether the 74.9% of market rent for a similar dwelling, whether that could be for a premium dwelling, for example, whether there can be a skimping on amenities or unit size, for example, and whether they can be sold off or made unaffordable after the 15-year period. Thank you.
Yeah, a 74.9% threshold in inner Sydney or Melbourne is not going to be affordable for anyone on social security, anyone earning under $60,000. So really this is... it's some more greenwashing, and the fact that the whole build-to-rent movement came to Australia on Treasurer Morrison's enthusiasm, seeing the UK, and it was all about affordability. Now we're down to just 10%. The property lobby want to reduce that to 5%. We know these are going to be one-bedroom dog boxes where minimisation is provided. There's really no... quality of tenure to be provided in this arrangement. So it does concern me that, the minimum build to rent's 50 and we're going to get 5 affordable units. It should be limited to 30% of median income for the city so that it sort of washes out some of the higher incomes in those inner city locations.
Just finally, Mr. Fitzgerald, talking about tenancy protections, which you know, I hear a lot about. I'm interested in your view about the proposed tenancy protections in this joint submission, which has 5-year leases, no cause evictions. This is the joint proposal from Chia Shelter and the Property Council, and whether that's something that you'd be supportive of.
Well, certainly that's an improvement on the legislation, yes.